Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Trinidad and Tobago chapter of the International Facility Management Association, better known as TT-IFMA. Welcome to our chapter meeting, our webinar, Getting the Best Out of Your SLAs in FM. And I'm happy to introduce to you our feature speakers, Mr. Edward Casal and Ms. Giselle Holder. Mr. Edward Casal, he is an IFMA certified facility manager. He's also a project management professional and a lead green associate professional as well. Edward has over 28 years experience in industrial engineering, project and business management. He is the current CEO of Service Limited, which is an integrated facilities and project management company in Trinidad and Tobago. And the best of all, he is our current chapter president. And also he serves as the chairman of the Facility Development and Management Committee of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce. I would also like to add that Edward also serves in one of IFMA's international boards or committees, which is the Business Committee. Is that correct, Edward? Business Committee.
Business Community, yeah.
Business Community out of IFMA. I would like to now introduce Giselle. Giselle Holder is also an IFMA certified facility manager. She is also a project management professional. She's a graduate of the Rochester Institute of Technology with a master's in facility management. And she has also been globally recognized by IFMA as an IFMA 40 under 40 facility management professional. Giselle currently works as the director of Acutus Caribbean Facility Management Company Limited and has been in the FM profession for over 12 years. Giselle is also happily known as one of our past chapter presidents, and she's the current treasurer of TT-IFMA. So we'd like to welcome both of them, and we thank them for providing us with this knowledge on SLAs in FM. So we're going to get started. We are going to ask everyone. It'll be great. We would be happy if we could see your faces, if you can turn on your cameras, if at all possible. We will be taking questions from this session. So hold your questions, take your questions down for the end of the session. We would be happy, Giselle and Edward would be happy to answer those questions to help you apply the best practices in service level agreements on your job from tomorrow. So welcome.
Thanks, Akian.
Thank you, Akian. I'm just looking at all the names on the screen. So we have a full house. So Bina, good to see you. Teresa, I knew Teresa would join. So we want to talk about service level agreements, and one of the things we have seen is a lot of the business and finance concepts and contract concepts of IFMA tends to be, we get glazed over looks from FMs a lot of times. It's not always the easiest area of FM for many people. We also tend to lean on specialists for some of these functions like contract management, etc. We have found that SLAs, so service levels agreements, there's often misunderstanding about what they are, and we thought it would be a good thing to have a conversation. So service level agreements, what are they? So before we understand completely what a service level agreement is, I think it's good for us to do a quick review of some of the parent aspects, which are the service contracts, service specifications, and performance specifications. They all relate to service level agreements. So I think this will be a very quick run through of what those are. Okay. So a service, why are you going back and forth? All right. A service contract is a contract between two parties to perform various labor-oriented services funded on a periodic basis. It's time-bound, it's mutually agreed, right? It's legally binding because we have a legal contract, so it's often written in legalese. And it can include several sub-documents or appendices, which include a service level agreement. All right, and we all see these contracts, and herewithal, and so on so party, which we'll call the first party, and so on so, which we'll call the second party, and they start like that, and they can be pretty long and intensive. The contract identifies the parties. These are some of the terms we need to look at. It describes the service. It talks about performance measurements, and therefore we're going to start seeing where some of the terms parallel themselves across the different documents. Costs are very important in our contract, and how you define costs and how you pay costs, whether it's a lump sum or different. How the contract is going to be initiated and terminated, start and end dates, how, you know, what methodology of startup and shutdown, special provisions like insurances and other various provisions that could be quite lengthy depending. Like some companies will have certain job safety analysis type work that has to be done, and all of these will be included in the contract. What termination provisions exist, if there's going to be early terminations, and then of course signatory. So it's a legal document. Now, move on. Right, Giselle.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Edward. And as Edward just established, what we're really trying to do is get a very clear understanding of all the different parts, you know, and then also take you to the point where you're able to see how each part fits in, where there are some overlaps, because we know there are overlaps, and also, you know, what makes each sort of unique, right? So under service specification, we're talking now about the fact that this is part, right, of the service contract. The specifications are developed and agreed upon to bring a certain level of clarification and also a certain level of detail. And that detail talks about that level of service and that quality that we want to achieve. But it is not, and you realize we went very school teacher here on you with the underline and the bold, right? Because we want to make the distinction that it is not the SLE, right? It's a part, right, of that wider contract, right? So it's, and I like how it was put here in terms of a precursor for a service level agreement. It gets us in that frame of mind. It builds the framework for the SLE, right? So Edward, you are my clicker.
Your clicker? Okay, hold on.
Right. And also you are able now to, exactly, to get that minimal level of assessment as it's stated. Now, what we want to look at here with these specifications is that we have three, if you want, different areas we can look at. We can look at internal standards, right? And it speaks now to your organization, your FM standards, right? So within your FM department, your strategic plan for FM, you know, how does that fit in, and how has it been in terms of previous contracts? Then we look at external standards. So we're getting now into a bit deeper into the regulatory requirements, best practices, international regulations and standards, health and safety laws, you know, all the things now that we have to take into consideration depending on the environment we're working in. Environmental standards too would be another one that we need to take into account. And also we look at the procedures, right? So we're looking at specifications about what the contractor has to do, right? And are those any technical things that that company needs to abide by, that they need to put in place in order to fit to this specific scope that we have and the specific work that we want them to do.
Hold on, did I jump forward too many times?
I don't know. That's us, right? So the next one is
Right.
the
Okay.
right. Great. So just in terms of the service specification, I know I just want to interject that why hasn't Zoom allowed for 2 persons to click? Just want to see anyway. But yeah, so service specifications, just continuing on again. This could be prescriptive or performance based, and we added in here a hybrid because as you get into it and you get accustomed to these sort of these guides, right, in terms of how you want your service specifications to be written, you kind of actually could pull from the best of both worlds. And the great thing about prescriptive, sorry, me and this list, right, is that we are more or less accustomed to that one. That one is what we are accustomed seeing, where we very detailed, you know, you're talking pages and pages of how we want it done. Where we aren't as familiar is with the performance-based one, where we actually being very detailed, you know, but it's not about the how, it's about the what, the outcome. It's about what do I, as a client, right, as a person receiving this service, what do I want at the end of it? And I allow the vendor, I allow the other party to detail how they are going to get there. I don't impart that onto them. They are able to respond in kind. And therefore you could see how you could also pull from each part on a certain contract, in terms of there may be something you really want to be prescriptive about, and there may be other things you really want to leave it up to the contractor and you want to just be very specific about the outcome. And so you could get the best of both worlds there. So what is found within the service spec? Well, it really should provide for us that description of the objective. So what do we really want to get out of this service that we are asking for? What is that general description of the service? So very clear language. You want to be able to detail what you're going to get out of this. And as we mentioned before, the specific outputs, right? We're not being vague, we're talking in clear language in terms of explaining the service outputs required. And also there may be cases where there may be specific inputs that are required, sometimes drawings, sometimes technical specs. You know, these are the sort of things sometimes we need to ensure happens before. And this play a very integral part in terms of the whole process, being able to get those outputs. So we need to explain what are the requirements of some of those inputs, whether we're expecting this of the other party to provide, whether we are providing some of the inputs, you know, so who's doing what, you know, all these things we need to be very clear about as we move forward. And we have here the service specifications continuing in terms of how do we describe the performance? So service specs, as it says here, can look at it in terms of critical success factors. So another very common term for this is our KPIs, our performance indicators. And that we really want to tie back to what is critical, what are the priorities of the organization, what is of extreme importance. So my KPIs may not be your KPIs because it's very specific to what you do as an organization and what you want out of this specific these specifications, out of this greater SLA, and to fit into your contract. So the SLAs therefore can be an active tool that we use to achieve the KPI, because it's going to allow us to really have this detailed, more or less step by step, that, you know, once you are able to achieve these things, you're able to achieve these very specific success criteria, right? And these success factors. So we're also able to play a sort of almost like we're checking, where we're able to check back on the success, you know, where we've reached, how we are able to do it. So your SLA has a double role, triple role, many roles in terms of helping us ensure that that specific level of service and level of quality is achieved.
Okay, so just to summarize, you can have several service specifications in one contract. And if I want to use an example, let's take a janitorial contract. You may have a service specification for bathrooms. You may have a service specification for landscaping. Let's assume it's all part of janitorial. or exterior surfaces like pavements, you can have a service specification for your hygiene products. So each one of those could be a service specification within a janitorial contract, an overall janitorial contract. All right. So the service level agreements, and IFMA makes it very clear that the service specification is a subset, is a part of it's the part of the contract that speaks to those things that Giselle just talked about. The service level agreement is also part of the service contract, where this level of service is defined in those small subcategories that I talked about, not necessarily on a whole global basis. So you can have many service level agreements within one contract. All right. So again, it's mutually agreed between the service provider and the client. Now, a service level agreement can also be an in-house document. So you can have a service level agreement with your in-house janitorial provider or your in-house maintenance team. It can also be where you use it for outsourced contractors and the customer. So the service provider commits to agree a certain level of service, a certain quality. It's really a quality-based agreements, and some of the measures might be things like availability, serviceability, performance operations, which include formal requirements and targets, but they're not always just exactly what is the main KPIs. So it could talk about how the bathroom smells, for example, or how well, you know, the touch and feel of the counters and so on. So level of service time may be specified as targets as minimum, maximum. That's often an SLA target. You know, we respond within X amount of time. All right. So more on SLA alternative definition. So I actually went outside of IFMA and found and was looking at a white paper by another organization, and they talk about the service SLA supporting the wider contract, but it in itself should not be written as in legalese. So the service level agreement is really for the people who are operating to be able to talk to the clients and not worry about the people in procurement every day. All right. So in plain English, in normal language, it's because it's a working document, right? It's often the discussion around the development of the SLA, where the stakeholders understand each other's needs and capabilities that really bring out the best in it. It does need to be signed, but you're looking for a win-win agreement, and we'll get into a little more of that when we start talking about the best practice and tips in a little bit. All right. So the idea is to seek win-win between the client and the provider. And again, this is all agreed before the contract is signed. So this is not after the fact. This is part of the contract development. All right. Service level agreement also specify incentives and financial penalties. I have not ever experienced an SLA with an incentive, but I've certainly experienced them with financial penalties.
Indeed.
And then there's also the right to terminate. So the right to terminate exists in the contract, but it can also be enshrined down into at the SLA level, because you can use the failure to meet SLA targets on a consistent basis as a reason to invoke termination at a contract level. All right. So I like to look at it as almost the SLA is like a performance appraisal. The intention is to improve performance and to keep performance high, but if there's consistent poor performance, you can use it then as a disciplinary tool. All right. It's often a formal document, agreed. And performance targets. So SLA issues are often split between specifications and performance targets. So the three are interrelated, which I'm going to show you in a little model in a couple of seconds. And again, there's a lot of mirroring of information between the three: specification, SLA, and contract, right? So we accept that. All right.
Yeah. So just as we're talking, because we always like to make sure we bring things home to everyone. So just some ways in which you can use your SLAs And this is just real tip of the iceberg kind of thing, because it's almost limitless in terms of how you could apply it. But if you want to look at being able to establish response time and how would that work out, you know, you want to ensure, for example, that for every blown LED bulb on the floor, that it is changed out within 24 hours of failure. So you see, it's almost mirrors a metric, right? In terms of for this to happen, we need it. We need this to be treated this way when this occurrence, you know, is experienced. In terms of uptime, that's another thing. In terms of how we need to avoid certain long periods of downtime. So we could say something if it's a data center, right? That we need to provide electrical power supply 24/7 with no more, well, 30 minutes might be too long for a data center, but for this example, no more than 30 minutes per month downtime, right? So that's what we're looking at, you know, so you're getting very specific in terms of what you want to get. You could look at the quality standards. So you could start quoting now, you know, upper standards by saying, you know, you want your bathrooms, anytime you go into your washrooms and stuff, that it reflects a certain level, right, of service. And we could draw on the upper standard, which talks about level of cleanliness, and then it could also be used for landscaping. You can look at your more technical standards in terms of ASHRAE. Now, if we're talking fresh air intake, we're talking ventilation, we're talking the use of our air condition, and we could put those in as well and refer to them. And then in terms of metrics in general, we could establish what we want in terms of the time taken to close out work order requests. And as I said, you could get really, really very specific, very granular, depending on what you want for this particular engagement, right? So it may be that you establish this between yourself, the two parties, and then another one, you choose something different because it's not applicable or other things are applicable, right? And you get to really play with it because it's what you want out, what the both parties, want out of this agreement. And as Edward mentioned before, it must be mutually agreed upon, right? This really needs to be a two-way street in terms of how we talk about it and how we reach to that final outcome.
Okay, so the model, I just wanted to kind of graphically show it because a lot of the textbooks don't try to do this. In terms of the relationship, the service contract is the overarching. Then out of that, below that, you have the service specification, and below that, you have the SLA. So the SLA rides under the specification. And then in performance measures or KPIs feed in and out of both of them, and they're related to both. We use the performance measures to manage the SLAs and vice versa. Now, as just to reiterate what Giselle might have said, is that your service specification sets your benchmark. Let's use the standards in bathrooms. You may have a 1 to 5 standard, and it's a qualitative standard. So it's not like you're measuring electricity or you're measuring the height of grass or anything. It's a qualitative standard, but there's difference behind them. The specification might say that you need to hit a level 3, but your SLA, you may end up agreeing with the client that, listen, we're going to try and hit level 4. So we're going to agree to level 4, which is actually higher than the specification. So the specification does set the minimum bar. All right. The SLA that you agree on may be better, or maybe that. All right. So it's used as a benchmark for which to develop the SLAs. All right. More people coming into the room. So best practices for using SLAs, and using, developing, and using. All right. So first of all, understand the client's expectations. So I'm going to speak on the part of the vendor. So Giselle has hired me as an FM, and we have a contract we're developing. We're trying to sign off on a contract. It was an RFP. We answered the RFP, and now we're in the contract sign off stage. and we say, okay, let's agree on the SLAs. So I want to be very careful to understand her expectations. And I want to do that because we often mistake the expectations. I want to write it down and I'm going to ask for confirmation. Is this what you mean? I'm going to show you a picture if necessary. And I think pictures often, you know, are very valuable. Yeah. Just like in project management, don't overpromise. We go into these contracts very eager and we say, we can do this and we can do that. Don't overpromise, be realistic. All right. And we're going to, that comes to the next point about being smart. Right. And we know the acronym SMART and we talk about it in many forums. Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. All right. So it have to be specific? I have to be able to measure it. It can't be something that's very difficult to measure. Yeah, it has to be something I can actually achieve. So don't promise. I can't promise to drive at 150 miles an hour when I know I can't drive more than 50 miles an hour. And achievable and realistic are tied together. And then of course timely. Now you can also use real resourceable in RS as opposed to realistic. Do I have the resources to apply? And I'll give a little example about smart targets. We did an RFP for a vendor, a client that we never went in with it. And one of the SLA targets was that we had to have in washrooms, they had to have a physical person in the washroom for the full 8 hours of the day. So when we looked at the number of washrooms, we said, well, you know, to do that, I have to have an extra person because I have to give people a chance to have a break and so on. So we need to have an extra person within the staff. And they're like, no, you can't have an extra person within the staff. And then I said, well, okay, well, fine. Tell me how you're going to measure this. How are you going to measure this performance? How are you going to measure the SLA of having somebody physically present 8 hours a day rather than 7.5 hours, right? Or 7 hours. And they say, well, we're going to check every 15 minutes. And I say, who in particular in your organization is going to check every 15 minutes? Do you have somebody assigned to that to check, basically micromanage, prescriptively micromanage? You're not micromanaging the quality, just micromanaging the presence of the person in the location every 15 minutes forever. How are you going to do that? And there's a washroom, so you can't really put cameras up. And they couldn't answer the question. So really and truly, they had their expectations were unrealistic and unachievable. I knew they were never going to be able to monitor the performance, but if somebody passed there twice for the day and happened to pass at the same time that the person was taking a break, they would mark that person down as absent 100% of the time. So we said, you know what? This is almost a no-win situation. It's not a win-win for us because it's unrealistic. So that's an example of not so smart objectives. All right. So how are you going to monitor the performance? Explain that to me. How are you going to monitor it so I can now put things in place to assess whether that's reasonable, etc. Ensure who is his client contact, not for monitoring, but who's the client contact I have to go to resolve issues. It cannot be a vague situation where you don't have a person. I need to know Giselle is the person to go to. It can't just be a calling help desk. All right. And agree between us. How are we going to resolve any issues that come up? And we're not talking about official conflict resolution. We're talking about on a month-to-month basis, week-to-week basis, how are we going to resolve any issues that come up? If you say, listen, I have a little issue with some performance here, how do we report it? How do we resolve it and fix it? There has to be a willingness to make improvements. I have to be willing to make improvements and to lean backwards to try and make things go better. And I want to also make sure that there's an inclusion of indemnity clauses to protect my resources as the vendor, as the performing the people performing the work. which basically indemnify us against things that we may feel are not really our fault if something goes wrong. I don't have an example that comes to mind right now, and also exit clauses. Now, again, you might say that that's something for the overall contract, but because you may have many SLAs, you do want to capture it at the SLA level. All right, so an indemnity clause, for example, if I have to do power washing in your of your hardscapes around your building, and WASA puts a ban on using water, I now have a constraint against performance. So I need to have an indemnity clause against drought and against the utility ban in me. That just came to my mind, all right? And then of course, make sure the time and money assigned for that particular service is linked with my ability to perform against the SLA. So if the money is too small or the time allotted is too small to achieve the level of SLA that the client is asking for, it comes back to the first point of, is it reasonable? All right. So that is from my perspective as a supplier. Giselle will talk about her perspective as a client.
So
we just
what
randomly pick that.
And what we found, which is really interesting, is that there are so many similarities in terms of literally, we could have almost used the same slide for this, right? When we're talking clients and we're talking vendor. And the reason remains because of that mutual agreement. So whatever we want from the vendor, the client should be willing to give as well and put on the table. So if you want open and frank communication, it must be both ways. If you want transparency, it must be both ways. If you want compromise, you want to be able to negotiate, it must be both ways. And to me, that is one of the biggest takeaways from this SLA, and understanding it is that it's not meant, although we do use it as like that, this big stick, but it's really meant to get the best relationship out of your between vendor and client. That's really what we're aiming for, right? We're not aiming for to hold, nobody wants to go to arbitration, nobody wants to go, to have a case against anyone. But what we're really trying to get is, how can we establish from day one how we're going to work this out and how we're going to get that objective at the end. So as Edward said, on the client side, we want to ensure too that the vendor can meet the quality expectations. So the client now needs to ensure that maybe there would have been some sort of pre-qualification process, some sort of vetting, right? Some sort of reference in terms of ensuring that this person is competent, they are able to deliver this service. And that may happen even before we reach to this point, of course, right? So those are product pre-work that you would have put in place. And then you also have that opportunity to clarify and to ensure that we both understand what the quality expectations are. We've touched a bit before on standards, and the great thing of standards allow us to do is to be very objective in our language. You see, what happens, I may say that I want this to be clean. But what does clean mean, right? In terms of the vendor, right? What does it really mean? And so we really want to establish what do those terms mean and ensure that we are on the same page. And what I would ask you to just go back, I just want to touch on one more thing. In terms of the vendor too, the other part of it too, and I think going back to the little big stick thing, is that it's a learning curve, right? We are experiencing, just from a personal standpoint, where because of COVID, we're actually working with a lot more persons that maybe you would not have worked with before, right? You're bringing in additional resources, and there's always going to be that teething period. There's always going to be that, I don't yet know your culture, you don't yet know mine. But there's that openness and that willingness for us to learn, for us to be on the same page. And so I really love that point in terms of allowing for a learning curve for the provider, for the vendor, for the supplier. And because we're going to understand, it's not that the first slip up, we're just there to terminate the contract, right? There should be some sort of, conversation. And to Edward's point, in terms of that client saying that, hey, we're going to have somebody there every 15 minutes, that's not achievable. It's not realistic. But we need to have somebody on the client side who is going to be that point person, just like on the vendor side, going to be able to have these conversations. Then you're able to escalate as needed, right? So we could go to the next slide now. Right, so when we're talking the FM, previous slide, right, when we're talking the FM rule, it's good for us to establish, because you know, some of you may be here sitting down and saying, you know what, I never even got to see what this contract looked like, right? So I think that what we're trying to do here is really ensure that we reinforce the role and the value that the facility manager can bring to this process and will bring to this process. So yes, we understand we may have procurement departments, we will have the specialists, the lawyers, the legal, everything in there, who would really know the language and know the terminology and know, you know, all the clauses and the everything. The FM provides this very unique and almost specialist role by really driving it home, because we understand the service to be done, right? So we understand the flexibility needed. We understand the criteria, the priority in terms of delivering this service. And so we bring that sense of reality, right? We mentioned the SMART, we make it realistic because we know what is expected in this job. And so things like how things will be tracked, how things will be monitored, ensuring that realistic deadlines and realistic durations are given. Also how we want to deal with disagreements, how we want to deal with how things are reported, the frequency of those reportings, how we want to also ensure which parties are involved. Because do we want to treat this as a solely legal thing? Do we want to always ensure that the technical people are involved as well? So that sort of holistic view is very, very essential. And that is the value that the FM can bring to this process. So even if you are not, you know, hands-on in terms of the contract creation process, you, as we identify, there are certain inputs, you are part of a very essential input process for this SLA to work, right? Because what we don't want is for the facility manager, who in this case is almost like the executor, you're the one making it happen. You know nothing of the legal clause, and you don't understand, or you know what is going on, and therefore, you know, when things happen, when there's times, say we have to terminate or whatever, there's a disconnect in terms of what you would like to do and what the contract or the SLA says you can do. And you see that is a very, very, very awful position to be in, where you know you would have gone this direction, but the legal documents not allowing you to, right? Yeah. So we want to avoid that on all costs, and it really means being involved from the get-go and really having that say.
One of these key things as FMs, I think, Giselle, is that we do have to keep it simple, because if you have a pretty wide contract that has many different components to it, you can end up with a lot of SLAs. You have to sit down and as they say, it's not just saying, okay, I want this level of quality here and I want this level of quality here. It comes down to how am I going to monitor it on a regular basis as a client? How am I going to meet with my vendor or my provider on a regular basis? Mm-hmm. That is very, and we see it happening in our culture, where we lay down these very hard targets, and then we aren't always able to follow up with the once a month meeting or the once every quarter meeting. That doesn't review. The reporting review that doesn't end up just becoming a laundry list of complaints. Mm-hmm. It is a culture development, and it does change in culture. Takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. A lot of people think you could just put something in place one time and it happens. It doesn't. It just does, you know, a lot of reinforcing. It takes years of reinforcing to develop. So we've heard complaints about when SLAs don't work in Trinidad. There aren't that many places where there are a lot deep strong SLA cultures working, but we have seen them in operation. We have seen them in operation, and you can use them. Sometimes the overall corporate organization doesn't necessarily understand that, so the FM has to be an advocate for it. So you may be working for an organization, you may be an FM in an organization that's not an FM organization, and they may not care. They may not see this as being important. So it's a matter for us as FMs to go and advocate this and then live it out and so on. But so it is important to keep them simple, because if you get too complex, it's going to be very hard to maintain. All right. Okay. Oh, tips. Okay. I think I talked about the tips before I talked about the tips. So provide a monitoring or auditing function. This is both sides. The client really audits and monitors the performance on a regular basis, but you as the vendor, as a provider, should also be checking on the performance of your staff or your team. All right. You should also be monitoring your own self and say, is this cleanliness of this washroom up to level 4? Is it really? What is the client going to say if they come through the door now? Are they going to be happy or not happy? And at the end of the day, that's what we're there for, to make the client and the occupants happy. All right. It's like an ongoing performance appraisal at work. All right. And some companies do have a framework like that, where every month we go and review the performance and keep focused. All right. Communication is key. Again, it's supposed to be win-win. So communication, talking to your client regularly. I know we have clients, and I always try to tell them if things aren't right, call me directly if you need to. And I do. Yeah. We do have, and I'm the CEO of the company, and it's 350 people. And I always tell you, call me, don't hesitate. And I know sometimes they hesitate, but I do have clients that will call me on the phone and say, Eddie, here I have a problem. I say, okay, I appreciate you calling me. Let's get on it. Right. And it's important when you get that call of concern, not complaint necessarily, but concern, is to try and not to put away the defensiveness hat and get all, oh my God, I'm getting a complaint. They say, okay, I hear you. Let me figure it out. Let's go and figure it out and engage. So communication is important. It's about improving service. It's not about blaming. It's about improving service. Focus on what's being done. Getting things right that are not. What is? Hold on. Somebody have a mic on. Focusing on things that are not part of the SLA, whereas they may be nice. It's not going to amount to much if the SLA targets are not being met. So if your service targets that you've agreed on aren't being met, but you're focusing on other things, then that's not going to really help you. So focus on what's being measured. Make sure that you have the right resources. Don't be afraid of saying, listen, this person or this machinery or equipment I'm using for this is not working right. We talk to the clients and say, listen, I need to make some changes to get this to work better. Please have some patience, resource properly. All right. We have gone into a couple of cases where we didn't have quite the right cleaning equipment, and we had to go back and dial back and reapply some different technology. Similarly for people, we don't always get the right people in the right slot initially. That's okay. It's a learning curve, and hopefully the client will understand and work. I think most clients are willing to work with providers once they're trying. All right. Again, be smart, keep it simple. All right. Good collaboration builds good SLAs. Try to get a win-win situation. So that's some basic tips. And I think that's it. So we can happy to have question and answer session and discussions, arguments, criticisms, disagreements.
More so with Edward than with me. I'm cool.
I think June, if you can please mute your mic.
June was in trouble.
So a lot was discussed, and I'm sure you have lots of questions, which Edward and Giselle will be happy to answer. You can draw from your own experience, draw from examples, or tell us some of the problems that you are having that maybe we can talk through.
Yeah, we love the stories.
Yeah, so please, the floor is open to anyone. You can unmute and let us know what you're experiencing with regards to your SLAs. What are some of the challenges, or what are some of the solutions we could probably discuss with you? Edward and Giselle, you did an amazing job. You have no questions.
we've
I have a question, but you keep muting me.
I muted. Who's this? Let's hear
He's
it.
obviously unmuted.
Well, yeah, but is it third time on unmute? So, hey, Giselle and Eddie, how you doing?
Hello.
Raul here. So, one of the things that I sometimes run into, or I have experienced previously, is, for instance, is where SLA is too prescriptive. So you write down so much that you leave out something, and they say, well, that was not included, therefore you didn't mean for us to deal with that, because the SLA is so prescriptive. And then the other question is where the performance, and I'll give you an example, where the contractor providing the performance or performing on the particular task also requires other contractors to complete items for them to work. So, for instance, your contractor is responsible for janitorial, but he's not responsible for plumbing.
Right.
Toilet is clogged. Well, he's not responsible for unclogging a toilet. Right? As far as he can say, that's a plumber's job. Or the toilet is somehow malfunctioning, so the toilet can't flush. Therefore, that's not their job. You know, how do you cater for things like that in your SLA?
I wanna jump into the first part, and then I know Eddie is jumping in for sure, so I'm gonna take the first part. Just in terms of the prescriptive, in terms of the prescriptive part, and that is actually one of the negatives of being prescriptive, because if you're being prescriptive, you have to be thorough. There's no coming back and being, oops, we forgot this. I mean, you could have additional things in there in terms of, you could have opportunities for different scopes, variations, that if the contractor identifies something, they could add it in based on mutual agreements with the client and stuff. And those kind of help with the things that get left out. But that is definitely one of the drawbacks of choosing to undertake the whole writing of that scope of work. What I would think, as I mentioned before in the presentation, is you do have the opportunity, as we know, to allow for the contractor, especially in these negotiations, because really what we're talking about here is really that negotiation. We're talking it through, we're not yet engaged and stuff. So we have time, right? We have time, and it's really that time, that review time, that you get the benefit in terms of hearing from a good contractor. I'm stressing the word good, would flag and be like, yo, but you all didn't mention disposal of waste. You want me to cut the grass and stuff, but you didn't really tell me what to do with it afterwards, kind of thing, right? And there's that opportunity for that back and forth. But I have experience as well, the big oops, in terms of things being left out. And usually you use that opportunity to sit down again and talk, and hopefully you have another part who's willing to do so, and that you don't have a client who's just going to hold the big stick and be like, it's a fixed contract, you're supposed to have this in, and you don't have a vendor who's going to want to jam you with a variation, right? Because remember, what we're trying to do is get that mutual. So the opportunity there would be to sit down, and you may have a variation to discuss, but that it should still be on, that level of let's try to get it done, and let's really work towards the best solution. So on to Edward.
Yeah. So I think keeping it simple does help avoid, again, avoid over prescriptiveness. Keep it simple and broad. But also I think within the SLA coming up to the parent contract, or the contract that encapsulates the various SLAs, I think it's important to try and have clauses for. So if you're asking me about a change of service level, okay, the toilet is backed up, but that's not my responsibility. I say, but yeah, the toilet is a mess, right? But it's because it's caused by some. So again, that comes down to what do we put into our indemnity clauses. But if it is such that it's a level of service improvement because and not really performing as well as I should versus a change in scope. I think you have to be able to encapsulate in your SLA and in your contract the ability to go back and do a scope adjustment without having to do over a whole contract.
Yeah.
All right. And just last week, the company I work with, we had a discussion with a significant client about doing a scope change because of COVID, a scope change that affected the service will affect the service we're going to do, and it is to assign an addendum to the contract.
Yeah.
We agree on the SLAs for that particular. In fact, it didn't get as detailed as SLAs, but we agree on the scope change for that, and we sign off on that very quickly, and start to execute, because we have a general SLA understanding of that service built in from before. I think if you build any contract, the ability to go back and adjust, do scope adjustments without having to do over the entire contract, but that gets back to contract management. You can then build that in at the SLA level. But again, it comes down to, is it because I'm not performing up to level and I need to adjust the SLAs? Or is it that it's a complete change of scope? I think so it's like scope. It's like in project management, we talk about small changes where I have a contingency that can manage it versus having to go back and redefine the scope of the project using change management documents and stuff. I think you gotta look at it from that kind of perspective.
Yeah.
You know? So.
And if I can add,
Of course.
You can also build into your contract some sort of fluidity or flexibility by having like an ad hoc rate or rate that will encapsulate any changes or unforeseen changes. So it protects you understand what to expect if there is a change and a change that needs to be implemented. So you have that ad hoc rate that says, okay, I didn't plan for this, but I know if I didn't plan, but I have to engage in extra service, this is what it's going to cost me. And because of where we are now, everything is so fluid, you have to really have an SLA and establish a relationship with your vendor in such a way that you can escalate the contract when it's needed or de-escalate. Because 1 minute you have 50% occupancy in your building, next minute you have 100%, next minute you have 25%.
Or none.
So on the delivery of service. So you have to establish that fluidity in your contract from the beginning.
Thanks
How
for that. This is Cindy. Cindy.
Hi.
Hello.
Yes, hi. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. I just wanted to chime in a bit really on a couple of things I was listening to. One of which I think Eddie had mentioned, where one of his practices is that, if somebody has a concern or an issue on one of the buildings that he may be, responsible for, he's asked them to say, okay, fine, you can always call me, I'll be there to assist, which I have no problem with. So that's one. Two, we also mentioned that the preparation of the SLAs are usually done at a more higher level where the FMs aren't involved, and there ought to be more involvement. My concern really is that, for me personally, I've always been an advocate for improving the standing and improving the relevance and showing more importance of the FM in the organization to try and try and develop that. And I am just wondering, what can an FM or what can IFMA, TT-IFMA as an association can or has been doing to help promote that? I mean, I look at from my perspective, from the industry, and I try to gauge the number of professionals, persons who are certified, who have credentials, are certified in, facility professionals in the country. And I try to look at that against what, against where we want to take it to, at what level, because we really want to raise the standards of FM in the country. That is how I'm seeing it. Because I'm seeing the benefits of having somebody who is certified, somebody who understands what the FM responsibilities are, as opposed to someone who's just there to to turn on a light or turn off a light like a building, or what we consider formally a building supervisor, exactly. So I am trying to to look at IFMA as that driving force, and I'm just wondering, what do you think it's possible for us to change the culture, or at least make steps towards changing that culture to try and raise the standards of FM in the industry, and essentially raise the standards across the board. At least start off in Trinidad and eventually move to the Caribbean. That's the vision I have for FM in my position. So if somebody could kind of speak to that, that'll be nice to hear what you're thinking.
I think Cindy, you are pulling at heartstrings, because that is where everything we do in IFMA is buried. For us who on the call who've been in IFMA for a while, it's certainly, first of all, I just want to establish that it's not Trinidad and Tobago alone. Facility management basically was officially created as a industry in the 80s, right? Now the 80s may seem very far away, but it makes the whole career path and everything of facility management still fairly new. And I think because we've also suffered a lot from just the lack of uniformity, just in your what you've been sharing, building supervisor, operation technician, we have so many names we call ourselves, and it's really through organizations like IFMA, there are other ones, Global FM, and stuff, who've really tried to make facility management uniformed and define firm definitions of what we do, how we do it, what is expected of this role. So imagine at this stage, as of maybe 2 years ago, we've now established an ISO standard for facility management. So hence, we still speak into the newness of it, right? In terms of what is really happening on a global perspective for this very wonderful field. Now, we are in it. We experience it every day. So as you said, Cindy, we are there lobbying in our own ways, right? But as an organization, as Trinidad and Tobago chapter of IFMA, we work on the educational side of it. That is really our core focus in terms of ensuring that every facility manager who joins this organization is equipped with the right tools to be able to do his or her job. The other aspect of that is advocacy, which is what you're also speaking of. And that comes from several different levels. That comes governmental. It could come from our partnerships with other similar organizations in terms of getting out there, what is facility management? How can it benefit the organization? How can it benefit the country, right? And as you took that further to Caribbean and so on and so on. But, I would actually say, and I don't know if this is being optimistic, Aki and Edward would jump in as well, that we have seen so much growth. And maybe the growth is so maybe minute, right? Incremental, that, it almost could be missed. But I would say compared to when I joined IFMA back in 2009 to now, actually seeing people sending out RFPs, requesting very specific FM requirements, asking in terms of job description. Yeah, job descriptions, asking for FM certification and stuff. Those speak to a more mature FM environment that you would not have seen 10, 15 years ago, right? So, everything is incremental and it's happening. And I think because we're involved in the happening, it's sometimes very easy to miss what's happening, right? But we hear you, and we try our way of implementing it is through the education side. There are other organizations. Edward and I sit on the FM chamber, the industry of what am I saying? That's it, the chamber and the FM committee. And through them, they have a direct ear to the government. So the opportunities for regulations and laws and stuff exist through that. But we know the country we're in, and that is no excuse on our part, because we do continue lobbying. But unfortunately, the dynamic change that we're hoping to see isn't here yet, but I am fully confident it's getting there. And that's my say.
If I could jump on to reinforce what Gisela said, and it's a good segue to the end of the is a good segue to the end of the of the call. Is that so? I 10 years ago, as you said, you would not have had a job application out in the papers for an FM. Most organizations wouldn't even know what it is. One of the things that TT-IFMA has done, and has done loosely in collaboration with the Chamber of Commerce, and then later on directly in collaboration as a formal collaboration, is host a Caribbean FM conference every 2 years. And the main focus of that conference, we've had 7 so far, has been to advocate and grow the awareness at the corporate level of what FM is about, and the government level of what FM is about. And I think I have seen, because I came from manufacturing. I came into FM 7 years ago, 8 years ago from manufacturing, and I had no idea of this industry, and the fact that I was doing FM without even realizing it for many years. But the growth of understanding and at least acknowledgement of what an FM is, now there's a lot of work to be done. So you're actually seeing, as she said, government agencies and government organizations. We have a few government guys here who now have very high-level professional FMs working.
Yes,
and pretty sophisticated FM departments that may not have existed 10 years ago. So there is a change. Now, FM has been able to influence corporate C-suite. The C-suite conversation is still a fighting battle. And when we go to a place, which is the international conference, there's a whole side of us that we go every year. This last year was an exception, and we meet and talk with FMs from around the world, mostly the States. The conversation is similar. They're fighting the same battle we're fighting. Is how do you get into the C-suite? How do you get the C-suite to listen to you? And I think it comes back to not just industry or professional advocacy. It also comes back to the FM advocacy within the organization and trying to break the seals. Maybe, perhaps we may need to do a webinar specifically focus on that, Giselle and Akian, at some time soon.
Yes, it seems to be the recurring theme for today, FM and getting it out there. But no, very, very much needed. Always needed.
How do I get the procurement department to pull me into that conversation rather than handing me the document and saying, "Here, use that." And I hear you, and we do get that complaint. So, Cindy, I think maybe we'll have a little conversation on the side, because it takes to the next step, which is what Akian is going to talk about. We need volunteers. So, Akian.
Well, if are there any more questions before we wrap up to announcements? Anyone? Any last comments or questions? We just have a couple of announcements. Okay. So we'd just like to announce that we do have an FMP training, credential training that is coming up in around mid-May. That is the Facility Management Professional Credential. It's going to be 3 days a week, an hour and a half each day, and it's going to run for about 8 weeks. At the end of it, you would have done the modules, operations and maintenance, leadership and strategy, finance and business, and project management. That is going to take you to doing your assessments and getting your FMP credential, which is globally recognized. We also, as Edward said, we are really in the process of changing our board. So we are in election mode. So we are always looking for volunteers in the field who are interested in serving the Trinidad and Tobago chapter of IFMA in whatever capacity. It could be in events, it could be in membership, it could be professional development, it could be any of those areas where we would really appreciate the support. So if you are interested in supporting any of our committees, please do send us an email. Maybe Giselle or Edward could put our email address up. So send us an email, just letting us know what you're interested in, how we can help you. If you're interested in becoming a member, how that goes, we are available as a resource to our fellow colleagues as yourself in the FM industry to advance the cause of FM, to ensure that we promote, as Cindy and Edward and Giselle was saying, the value of FM to organizational success as a whole. So please reach out to us. We'd be happy to have you on board. And we look forward to seeing you at our next chapter meeting or webinar, which I believe will focus on sustainability.
Yes, in May. Yeah.
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 If you have not put your email address, you can also just send us an email, just reaching out to us saying you were on board tonight and would like further information on any of the things that we discussed today.
Great. Just to add a couple more little points is that we have been, with 3 or 4 of us or 5 of us have been, so Giselle is a past president, Akin is a past president, Vaughn, who's also online here, is a past president, and represent like leadership of the organization for the last 6 or 7 years. I am stepping down at the end of June. I'll serve my maximum term and then some. What this core plus a few others have done, in addition to trying to focus on Trinidad, is try to help advocate for Caribbean development. So we helped the Barbadian group start a Barbados chapter, not going so well. We've been talking with the Jamaicans, we've been talking with the Bahamians and a few other people, isolated people around the Caribbean. That we do have a couple of non-Trinidadian members of the local chapter from places like St. Kitts and stuff, where they're operating by themselves, so they just join our chapter. So we have been advocating in terms of how do we have grow Caribbean FM, because I think if the chapter was incorporated on a much bigger scale, it has a certain critical mass. So to answer that, to Cindy's point about Caribbean growth, we do have some goals about Caribbean growth as well, but we also tied in with what the international organization will let us do. So we're still working out things. We've had some things on the tool for about 4 years. We kind of eased off and we're coming back. And we're not sure how far we could push things, but we also, even if it's not to tie into our chapter, we're also quite happy, and we've been trying to help develop Caribbean FM chapters around the place. We know many of the practitioners in the other islands. So, yeah.
And just to add, Edward, globally, we are very notably recognized as a very strong chapter. Our membership has been consistent over the years. We do try to have host forums like this to support our membership, but we are recognized as a strong chapter because it's just outside Cayman Islands.
Yeah,
in the Caribbean.
We've been consistent with regards to our membership and the value that we've been bringing in. So globally, we are recognized as a strong chapter.
Right. Yeah.
Very cool.
So yeah, I just want to call for more people to become more involved and get more involved, and volunteer for duty. If somebody can give a couple of hours a month of their time, and we get 10 people doing that,
That's
we
all
get
it takes.
we've done, the chapter grows, we get more powerful, we can have more sessions, we can have more events, it becomes easier.
And those incremental changes could become more significant.
Significant, yeah. So
yeah, man. I just to Akian's point with next webinar, we're also trying to coincide that with World FM Day, right, which is next month as well. So, you know, we want to come together because that is always encouraged for World FM Day, for us to chat and celebrate all that is FM. And this year, I think there's a specific theme that's around COVID. So, you know, we're going to chat a bit about that. And then we'd also have a guest speaker. And so it should be a really, really good forum. So we'll be sending out correspondence around that. So make sure and save the date when you get those emails. Okay. All right, so I think that is us for this evening.
Thank you so much. We are happy to have you with us, and everyone stay safe. Thanks for joining us.
thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.